You use variables in game development a lot. Examples of very common things are like, what race did you pick for your character in Skyrim? What name did you type in? How many hit points do you have? What level are you? What inventory items do you have? How much damage does a sword do? All those stats are stored typically in variables. A variable is just a way to store that information. And typically you store that information because you want to access it later. You need to reuse it multiple times, right? Like, you constantly are checking how much gold you have, right? That's a very common thing. As you pick up gold, you increase the amount of gold that you have in your inventory, which then means that later you can ask to see how much gold you have in case you go to a store or some thief tries to steal from you. Variables are mutable. They can change. You can add or remove data to a variable. So you can take the amount of gold you have and you can subtract or add to it. You can take hit points, you can add or subtract to it. Including things like, for hit points, there are actually two different variables typically. One is your current hit points, and one is your max hit points, right? Like in Zelda, it would be heart containers versus hearts. And all those things are stored in variables. Variables are also important if you want to communicate between blueprints in any fashion. If you want to, say, have the player, like I'm running around here as the player, if you want this guy to have health, and let's say you want like an enemy to do damage to you, that enemy will take away from your health variable. So it's important for communicating between blueprints, and let's just show how to do some of these things. I'm going to make a new blueprint, and we're going to make a new variable test blueprint. And I'm just going to make a billboard here. And I'm going to drop this guy into the level. You guys can just, I'm going to give you guys a lab right after this so we can work on this together. So here's my variable test blueprint. I am going to go to the defaults, and I'm going to have it automatically receive input from player 0. So no matter where I am, it'll automatically be able to press the keys. So I'm going to go here, and I'm just going to hook up the F key just to prove that it's working. I'm just going to have it print out a string saying something like I exist. So I'll compile and play. So I'm going to hit F, and you can see in the top left, he lives in the level. Okay? Nothing really crazy fancy. It's just a blueprint. I set the default auto receive input to be player 0, and then I have the F key bound to it. Cool. So let's get to variables now. We've already done this. The variable button on the top left will add a new variable. So think about all the things you need to store. Let's take Pokemon, for example. Hopefully everyone is aware of Pokemon and has played it at some point. What are some things that define a single Pokemon? Let's take Pikachu, because everyone knows Pikachu. Give me examples of things that define Pikachu.
Uses electricity.
What is that? That's the type, right? What is type electric? Mouse? That's what they call him, right? What other stats define Pokemon?
Health points.
Health, right? That's another good one.
Mouse?
Yeah.
I didn't do that.
Max health.
I don't get into that, so I don't know. But
Pokemon is a good game, man. It's not just for kids.
they have mana, don't they?
They do not.
Power points.
So yeah, they have type, which is like electric mouse. Health, like 10. Max health, which might be like 20. You might be lower than max health, right? It's not ability points, because how many abilities can you have?
4.
You can have 4, right? You can have abilities, which are another type of variables.
Yeah, but you could only use them a couple of times, I remember.
Okay, so that's a good point. You can have 4 abilities. So abilities is actually an array of different things. Like, what does he have? Like, he has like Thunderbolt, Quick Attack.
He's a mouse, though?
Yeah.
Quick Attack, yeah.
You didn't know that, dude?
It was a rabbit.
No, Pikachu, electric, mouse.
Looks that much like a mouse. He's like a tail and ears. He's like a rabbit mouse.
Yeah. is an incredibly cute mouse-like Pokemon. It actually has this category as mouse. This mouse Pokemon right here, the species.
Have you seen the new Pokemon?
Just want to point this out.
A garbage bag and a refrigerator Pokemon?
What?
Yeah, look it up, like new garbage bag Pokemon.
Garbage bag.
Garbodor.
Trubbish.
Trubbish.
That is an awesome name.
Trubbish. A little garbage bag.
It's a garbage bag Pokemon.
Its arms are like the
And what's the other one? Refrigerator?
Yeah. It evolves? Does it evolve? Like it evolves into
Wait.
a bigger pile of garbage.
What? No.
Yeah,
Oh, it's in the anime too. What? Garbodor. You're right. There's Garbodor.
He got cigarettes for fingers.
That's pretty awesome. Like, who would want that as a Pokemon? That, like, if you got that as a kid for like a present, like, here you go, here's a trash Pokemon, I think I'd be a little bit upset. Oh, this guy right here?
Yeah, they're like so not creative. That's not washing.
That's a washing machine.
Oh,
Oh, this guy here, Rotom? That looks like a refrigerator.
He possesses, he's a ghost, he possesses different appliances.
Oh man, that's crazy. Oh, I see.
Changes his type, so your refrigerator's ice ghost.
Or like a lawnmower is nature
grass
ghost.
super Japanese.
All right. So like tackle. What is the other one? Give me another one.
Slime.
Slime. What's that one that debuffs the attack?
Tail whip.
Tail whip. So each of these abilities actually has stats on it, right? What are some stats? What are some variables that are on an ability? We mentioned points, right? How many times you can use them? Uses left, max uses, right? Those are two different variables, right? You can use Thunderbolt 10 times, right? I don't know how many times you can use it, but you have a certain number of uses left. It also, abilities have a type as well, right? Like what lightning or grass or water or whatever it is.
Max power.
Max power.
Base power.
Well, that's what base power, right? Accuracy, that kind of thing. These are all variables. Like this right here is a variable, which is an array. This is a variable, which is a number. Here's a variable, which is a number. It has a name, which is a string, a type, which is probably an enumeration, abilities. What type of variable lives in here? Well, an ability variable, which is a custom thing. It's not a number. An ability variable is made up of all these variables here, right? So you have 4 of these, 4 abilities, and each one of these abilities has these variables. So you have a variable which stores 4 abilities, and then you have each of those has its own list of variables there as well. So I mean, variables are just so ubiquitous, you're not going to be able to ever get away from them. And Unreal has a representation for all of these. So not like you would have to make a representation for ability, but lets you make that. It doesn't have like built-in variables for like Thunderbolt or whatever. But I made a variable here. Let's just start off with describing a Pokemon here in our variables list. I think that'll be a good way to start, and then I'll have you guys do some arithmetic. So I clicked on this button in the top left to add a variable. And in this case, I'm just going to do Pokemon name. And under here in the lower left, there's a variable type. So this is the list of all the different types of variables that it can represent. There's a bunch of variable types that are hidden under expanders, which are other types of variables which are beyond the primitive types. Everything listed here that's already being displayed is considered a primitive. So I just want to go over them real quick, what they mean and when you could use them. Boolean means it's true or false. This is things like, do I have the key? Am I dead or am I alive? Which is a very common thing. Things like, am I currently out doing battle? Am I, what are some other ones like, other than I'm dead? And I'm not, that'd be more like an array of status elements. This, in this case, would be like, am I currently fighting? Or am I in a Pokeball or not, right? Am I with the Pokemon trainer or not? A byte is just a number, but it has a limit of 8 bits, which means it can only represent a number up to 255. So it cannot represent any number higher than 255. These are typically used for things like, this is actually probably used to categorize what type of attack things are. So each type of attack is given a single number, like 1 or 17 or 42, some ID. and then that's assigned here. The reason why people use this over just a regular integer is that this is way more efficient and faster. In most cases, you're going to be using an integer instead. This can represent any number. Probably in Unreal, this can represent any number up to like it's whatever 64, 2 to the power of 64 is, numbers. That's the maximum number it can represent. That's the highest number that an integer can represent. Like if you try to represent a number higher than this, it'll roll over. Have you guys ever heard of bugs where if you ever tried to hit any number, let's just do 2 to the, there used to be bugs in like the old NES games where you'd hit like this max number and it would stop like a stat. If you ever got a stat up to this number, you could corrupt the save sometimes by getting that stat to roll over, and then your stat would be -1. There are maximum limits to how you cannot just represent infinity with an integer. There is actually a limit to how high that number goes. And that limit is what I just typed in here, which was, most cases it'll be 2 to the 64. That's the highest number. If you try to fit a number, if you try to add 1 to this and store that number in there, it won't work. So it'll roll over, and that's the physical limit of that number for an integer. Now floats can represent much, much, much higher numbers. So floats can represent 2 to the power of 64. It can represent a number to the power of this. Okay, so it can represent 1 to the power, something as high as something to the power of this. So effectively, for all game purposes, infinite, right? That's what a float is. A float is anything that includes a decimal point. So includes anything like 6.2 or 3.14. An integer only lets you represent whole numbers, so numbers without fractional components to them. Names and strings are very similar. A name is something that can be reused across multiple blueprints. Typically, it's used for localization. It's stuff to like represent strings that are shared. Like for instance, Pikachu is used all over the place in Pokemon, but they don't copy paste. They don't type out Pikachu every time. Instead, what they would probably do is this name gets inserted into a table somewhere, which makes it much more efficient to pull that name out. The difference between these two is that in most cases, you want to try to use a name if you can. If what you're typing in is dynamic and changes based on gameplay, then you probably want a string instead. Both of these things represent names or ways to describe a value. So like in this case, Pokemon name, I could type Pikachu. I can also represent him as a string, and it's the same thing. It doesn't really matter. For this class and for next class, you'll almost never care, but if you ever get a job working in Unreal, it's important to know that there's a difference between these two. Text is a string that is specifically localizable, so it's intended to be used in, like if you say type Pikachu, you can represent it as text, which will mean that it can be localized to Japanese and Korean and EFIG, so Spanish, French, Italian, German. All those things, you can use that as text. So there's 3 different ways. I just tend to favor strings because they're much more flexible, so that's what I use most of the time. Vector is just a XYZ coordinate, 3D point in space, or a 3D unit vector, so an orientation. Rotator is a pitch yaw roll, so it represents what your facing is. A transform is something that includes rotation, a vector, which is a position, and then scale. And then all the rest of these things will be, I'll go over in just a minute. So let's try to represent a little bit more about Pikachu. So I have his name. What else did I have? A type and a health. So let me just do his health. So if I had health, health will be what? Probably an integer. It could be a float, sure. What about max health? Right, that's probably a float too. So notice as I'm doing this, each one of these variables has a default value that I can assign to it, which includes things like max health. Maybe I want max health to be 20, and I want health to be 20 as well. Why do I need these two? Well, if you ever use like a recovery item in Pokemon, you change the health, you don't change the max health. But if you level up, you change the max health instead. Health can never be higher than max health, right? So max health is like the upper limit. So this thing tends to not change that often, while this is the thing that actually changes more often. So let's do some let's do some interactions with these variables. So when I drag Pokemon name in here, I get these two options to get or set. Before you decide which one of these, you have to think about what you're trying to do to that variable. Are you trying to get the value of that variable? So are you trying to, like, I have Pokemon name. Do I want to get the value, or do I want to modify that value? In this case, I want to print it out to the screen. So what do I want to do? Get. So I'll print that guy out. So I'll just plug him in here. Notice here that I can type in a string here, but as soon as I plug a wire in, it gets rid of that. So it uses what's in that variable. But now when I hit F, prints out Pikachu, right? Once you've added the variable to the graph, you cannot change the type. Keep that in mind. Notice this drop-down box is grayed out now because I have this guy in the level already. If you delete all instances of that guy in the level, then you can change the type. So keep in mind, once you've placed this guy in the level, you can no longer change him. So a shortcut is that if you drag and drop, it shows you these two options to get and set. But you can also hold down Control while dragging, and it'll automatically turn it into a getter. Alternatively, you can hold down Alt while dragging, which will turn it into a set instead. Well, so let's do a set right now. So right now his name is Pikachu. We know that. If I change it to be a set, I can overwrite this name to be like, what, a Garbodor? That's the new one. Okay, so I changed the Pokemon name. So how do I print this guy out now? Plug this guy in here, like so. So what is this thing going to print out now? Hopefully Garbodor. Right. So what happened to Pikachu?
It got changed by the set.
So Pikachu is gone now. Like that name, Pikachu does not exist anymore.
So in a game, would that mean that it would just basically be a way of kind of absorbing the information from Pikachu into a new character, Garbodor?
It's not really absorbing. This is just his name. So in this case, I'm just changing the name of my Pokemon from Pikachu. You know how you can name, I don't know if you play, but you can name your Pokemon in Pokemon. You can change their name to be whatever you want, but once you change it, that's it. Like that's what their name is. So in this case, if I just didn't do this, what will print out here? Pikachu, right? As soon as I do this, that Pikachu name is gone. Even though I didn't change where it's pulling the name from. You can think of these like buckets, right? Imagine in your head like a bucket which is holding the Pokemon name. And if I swap out what was in that bucket with something else, whatever was in there is gone. I threw it out. It's become garbage. So that's the difference here, is that I'm using set and get. This is the same variable that I'm modifying. I'm modifying the variable here, and then I'm reading that same variable here. Okay, just to reiterate, you drag one in here. I pick set. What is it called? Trubbish? And here, it's asking me what string I want to print. I'll get the variable and I'll plug it in here. So Trubbish is there. Another trick is you can drag a variable from here directly on top of an input link, which will then auto-connect it. It'll save you time when you're doing this a lot.
So just so I understand, it's not changing the information associated with Pikachu.
Right. It would just be his name. Because we haven't really defined, it doesn't change his health or anything like that, right?
That's what I was looking at.
Yeah, so his health remains the same. In fact, we can print out his health too. So if I add another print string here, I'm just going to print the string right after this, and I just print out health. I'm going to drag this on top, but it doesn't work because it's requesting a string. That's okay. You can put this here and you can plug it in this way, and it'll convert it for you. So what will that print out? What will it print out? Trubbish and then what? 20? Yeah. Okay.
Why
So this is a number, right? This is a float that we talked about. It's the thing with a floating point. And this is expecting a string, which means it's expecting text. So while we as humans can easily say, oh, well, 20.0, that should be shown as 20.0 in characters, it doesn't mean the same thing when you're typing that as a string. So if I put all these decimal points in there, the reason why there's a difference is that sometimes you don't want to print out all the values in the floating point. Sometimes you only want to print out a limit of them, which is why this box just converts it for you. It's like a power outlet converter when you go to a foreign country. Like it automatically translates it for you. Okay, so that health is there. If I plug health in here and I set the health to 10, now what will it print out? 10, right? Yeah.
So the converter is able to remove decimal places from the floating point integer?
It's whatever they decided that this thing should do. And in some cases it will, not permanently, it'll just temporarily for the purposes of printing out the screen.
Right.
If you had 600 decimal points after this, it wouldn't necessarily convert all of them. It might truncate that so it only prints out a few. Okay.
So really quick, sorry.
Yeah.
If I wanted to keep better track of the health with a float, but only display whole numbers to the player, I would have to change it to an integer.
Right, exactly.
And then go into that string.
Yep, you can drag a wire off and say, hey, int. You want to cast to. Yeah, you want to cast it to an int, but there's actually a math operation for that. What you want to do is get the floor. So you have two choices when you're rounding float. If I give you 3.5, what do you want to round? Do you want to round up or do you want to round down? Right? So in this case, like you want to round it to the, let's say you have 3.8, and even though it says 3.8, what are you going to show on screen? 4. Are you going to show 4, like as health? So let's say you had 10 health on screen. Let's say 10 is your max health, and I do 0.1 damage to you. How much health are you going to show on screen in your game HUD? Are you going to show 9 or are you going to show 10? Like, what's more correct to the player?
Like, I could say that you didn't actually hit the player that
No,
way.
you did.
Do over 1 damage in order to make contact.
Okay, so I do 0.4 damage to you. I did damage to you. I'm an enemy. I did damage to you. What are you going to show? Are you going to show that you're still at full health? Because there's a big difference when you're telling the player that, hey, I hit you for 0.4 damage, but if you tell them that their health remained exactly the same, what are they going to think? That they didn't actually do any damage.
Right.
That they're invincible. So in this case, when you're displaying health, I think you want the floor, which means if you have 9.99 health, this will convert it to 9. Okay, it'll take it down to the lowest level because it's not max. You don't have 10 health. You have less than 10 health. So you have to pick whether you show 9 or 10, or maybe you just bite the bullet and show 9.9 or whatever. But in this case, if you take the floor, it'll give you, notice how it changes the color of this thing from a green to like a seafoam green. This is an integer now. It gave you back an integer, which means it takes 9.9 and gives you 10. Or it takes 9.1, I'm sorry, it takes 9.9 and gives you 9. It takes 9.1 and gives you 9. You can also, if you care, you can take the ceiling of it, which will do the opposite. So if you have 9.9, it'll give you 10. If you have 9.1, it'll give you 10, right? So it'll take any floating point and give you the numbers above that, right?
Okay.
Some other floating point things we can do. Clamp, float, fraction, round. That's what you want. So if you just want, hey, if it's less than 0.5, then give me the lower part. Like if it's 9.4, give me 9. If it's 9.9, give me 10. So just round, then you can just use this. Round.
So that specifically round will go up from 0.5?
Yep, so if I take health and I have 9.9 health, and then plug it into here, gives me 10.
Okay.
Sorry, I gotta do this. I gotta not change the health. It gives me 10. But if I go here and select health and pick 9.1, okay, so you can use that.
So 9.5 would return.
I believe it rounds down, but no.
Rounds up.
In this case, it rounds up.
Okay.
That's not consistent. That's kind of like, it depends on what Unreal decides to do. But yeah, it'll round up in that case, it looks like. Okay. So let's change some more. So does that make sense as far as what a variable is currently doing? I have health and name, because I'm about to give you guys some exercises. So let's take health, for example. I'm going to change health to be an integer just for keeping it simple, because again, while we are talking about fractional parts, it is important to talk about. Health is usually stored as a fraction in most games because you can do less than a full point of damage. In Overwatch, our health is floats. So even though we only display integer, but we do that thing that I just told you about where if you have less than max health, it'll go to the floor of that.
So it would be like a check at if you're at 100% and you do 0.1, it does reduce it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But if you do 99 and you do 0.1, it doesn't.
If you're at 99, it does 0.1. If you're at 99.9, it does 0.1. If you're at 99 and you do 0.1 point of damage, you're at 98.9, which will mean it'll show 98.
So it will show 98.
Mm-hmm.
It always rounds down.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So even though we track health as a float, we do damage as floats. We show you health as integers. So in this case here, what I want to do is I want to take my health. Well, let's take my max health and let's make it 100. And let's take my current health, which is at 0. How do I make my current health equal to my max health?
Wait, I'm sorry, can you say it again?
So if I press F, I basically imagine I'm at 1 health right now. And let's just say I used a health potion, and that health potion restores me to max health. How do I set the health equal to the max health?
So you get the max health.
Okay, so I'm going to go here, and I'm going to get the max health.
And then on the pressed F,
Mm-hmm.
you would set health, your regular health,
Okay, I'm going to set health.
to the value of max health.
Right. And just as an example, what I'm going to do is set up a separate key here. I'll have G print out the health. So G prints out the health, and F will hopefully reset the max health, or reset the health to be the max health. So I'm pressing G, that's my health right now. If I press F once, and then press G, that's my health now. 100, right? So very simple way to reset your health to be equal to your max health. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions, anyone?
I hope I don't have to use this anytime soon.
You will have to use it very soon. Why?
It's alright.
Okay, let me step back a little bit. So, John, how do I print out the health, right?
Just the regular health.
Yeah, just regular health.
You get health.
Okay, get health. And then I plug it in here.
Yes.
Okay, that's my current health. All right, so I have my health. What is my health currently? It's a 1.
Yep.
What is my max health? 100? So like, a very common thing is health potions. So what is a way, like when you ever watch a game, you ever play like Gears of War or like Call of Duty?
I play games like them, but I don't play those.
Okay, well maybe we'll just use Skyrim as an example because they have health pots in there. How would you make something that restores all your health back to normal when I press a key? When I press G. So I'm just going to have you do the same thing. So I have health, which is at 1, and I have max health, which is at 100. And currently, when I press F, okay, how do I change it so health is equal to 100? Let's just forget about max health for a second. How do I set health equal to 100?
Besides changing the actual.
Yeah, I could change it here, but that would change it. I want it to start off at 1, and then when I press the G key, I want it to change the health to be 100. So how do I change this value here? So I have these two things.
Is it the same way that you would do the changing Pikachu to Garbage?
Yes. So I'm going to go here. So which one of these do I use?
Set.
Set. Okay. And what do I do next?
Can you?
Well, how do I change the health to be 100?
You change that to 100.
Okay. That's correct. So I'm going to press G, and that's going to activate that guy.
That's as far as it goes. I thought it went further than that.
So there's my health. And now I'm pressing F, and my health is at 100, right? That's it. That's all you have to do to set health to 100.
So if you wanted to be a pickup, you would just, instead of making that press G, you would make it, you would link that set to 100 on a trigger.
Right. Yep, that's right. So how do I set max health to be 200? Like you leveled up and you doubled your health, which is a crazy level up.
You would, the same way, you would set to 200.
Okay. Cool. Okay, that's exactly right. So how do I set my health? Let's say my max health is 150. How do I set my health? It's still 1 at start. It only gets set to 100 when I press G, right? So I'm hitting, that's my health right now. I'm gonna hit G, which, let me get this in view here. So I'm pressing F, and I press G, and it changes the health, and now it's at 100, right? How do I change health to be equal to the max health instead of just 100? Because these aren't necessarily the same. 100 here is not necessarily the max health. So instead of setting health to be 100, what do I want to set health equal to?
Max health.
Okay, how do I do that?
You would get max health
Okay, perfect.
and then link that up to the health.
Yep, that's it. And now no matter what max health is, health will be equal to that. So if I press play, health is 1, I press G, and now it's 150. Okay. Okay, what is like one of the first things you learn in kindergarten? Is it second grade or third grade where you start learning math? 1 plus 1 equals 2?
They start that in kindergarten.
Really? They do that in kindergarten now?
Yeah. Well, especially nowadays. I don't know about when I was a kid.
So let's do 1 plus 1 equals 2, because I think we can do that. We're going to keep this F key that prints out the health. And in fact, let me show you a little bit, just real quick, how to format it, because right now it's printing out 1 in the top left. But what if I want to say, like, your health is :1, right? What you can do is you can just plug it in like this, which will print out just that number. But sometimes you want to format that thing that you output to the screen. You want to format it to say, like, your health equals whatever. And the best way to do that is to drag backwards from here, actually. You're just going to type text once, and then you're going to type text again. And this time, the second time you type text, you're going to search for format text. And format text lets you combine numbers and strings and as many number of things together into one line that gets printed out to the screen. So here, I could just spit it out, but instead what I'm going to type is, your health is, and then inside a set of curly braces, these are curly braces that you'll only use ever in this case. You can type anything here, anything you want. And whatever's in curly braces will get spit out as a variable here. And every time you put in something in curly braces, it will print out more things for you to plug in. And you can plug in anything in here, okay? And it'll format it so that it'll replace whatever is here with whatever you plug in here. Okay. I'm going to get rid of these because they're not helpful. And the reason why I do this is just so that when I press F, it says your health is 1. Okay?
Why do you even need to put the curly braces in there at all? What would happen if you didn't? Oh, because you need a place to plug it in.
Yeah, I need a place to plug it in. Because I don't, without putting curly braces, there's no place to like plug it in. I could do that, but then it just converts health. It doesn't, it gets rid of that string that I just typed.
Basically, this is a whole bunch of extension cords at that point, right?
Yeah, exactly. It just replaces, yeah. It lets me plug this guy in here.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's just daisy chaining. It's like Christmas lights again. It's like plugging it in one after another. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this. And I want to show you guys the first step, and then I'm going to throw you to the wolves, and I'll have you guys do more basic arithmetic, like subtracting 1 and multiplying by 2 and all those things. All right, so let's take health. And I want to add 1 every time that I press G. Okay. So I want to take this health, and I want to change it to be equal to 1 plus 1. What is 1 plus 1? 2. What is 2 plus 1? 3. Every time I hit G, I'm going to add 1 to my health. Okay? That's what I want to do. Currently, my health is 1. I want to say when I press G, it adds 1 to it. So, what's that? So yeah, it's a lot of, it's like eating potatoes in Skyrim. Like you just eat like 30 pounds of potatoes when you're trying to get back health. It would be set. Now here's the tricky part. What am I setting it to?
+1.
That would be awesome if I could just type +1 here. But it doesn't. What is that? What? Yeah.
Getting its original value, then adding 1 and setting it to that.
Yes. I'm glad you got it, Joey, but I want to make sure everyone else has it too. Health, what is, if I just type in 1 here, what is it doing?
It's going to change your health to 1 every time?
Yeah, every time. It's not doing anything to health, right? It's just setting it to 1 every time. If I put 2 in here, it's setting it to 2 every time. Every time I hit the key, it's just setting health to 2 again. It's not doing anything, right? So I want to change it so that this is equal to the current health plus 1, right? So how do I get the current health plus 1?
Plug health into that marker?
Well, I could do that. I could plug in health in here. So what is that doing now? That's not doing anything.
It's not doing anything at all.
Yeah. So I want to plug in health plus 1 into here, right? Does that make sense? I want to plug in health. So how do I get health plus 1 and put it into here?
Well, that's the question.
Yeah. So here, what I want to do is I want to add 1 to here. I want to basically like take this plus something else and then stick it into here. Well, that's really easy. You drag a wire from what you want to add to, and you either type plus or do the plus sign, and it gets this little integer plus integer. There's your plus. So now I have health. This is health right here, plus this number here. Okay, it's going to add this number plus this number, and it spit out the result here. So what am I typing in here? 1. And what am I doing with this? Okay. So what's happening now? I press G. It looks confusing though, right? This works, by the way. This totally is what's supposed to happen.
You gotta put in text now, so it says it on the screen.
Oh, it'll say it on screen. So I'm pressing F. My health is 3. I press G 3 times. My health is 6. G once, 7, 8, 9. I'm pressing G a bunch. I'm eating my potatoes in Skyrim. And now my health is 50. So I want to spend a bunch of time, probably way too much time on this, just to make sure it's clear. What do we do first? We're going to set the health to some value. We couldn't just type in 1 here. We couldn't type in plus 1 here. We want to set the health equal to the current health plus 1. So I grab the current health, that's this guy, plus, or you can do add 1, and plug it into here. You're going to feel inclined, when I tell you add 1 to health, you're going to feel inclined to do this and be like, okay, how do I, well, I can take the health. You're going to feel inclined to start with that, which you can, but if you do that, you take the health and you're going to add 1 to it. You're going to have to build it up from the left going outwards. So you can take the health, add 1 to it, and then what are you going to do here? This is kind of the tricky part. You're going to set health. So drag the health in here, set, plug it in. Health is 1. Okay, there are lots of other things you can do here. You don't have to just add. There are a ton of operations you can do. You can subtract. You can divide. You can multiply. Okay? You can multiply an int times a float, which will give you a float in return. Okay? All right, so I want to give you guys some lab to get used to doing this. So we did these two. Okay? Print the number. I just printed the number 42, but you can use whatever number you want. So we're going to do these 3. Okay? So I want you guys to make a blueprint just like I did, a class blueprint. And then I want you to set up a key that, just like I had set up. So one key that prints out, you can just do this. You don't have to do all that formatting stuff. One key that prints out the number, so I did F to print out the number, the result, and one key to perform the arithmetic. And the arithmetic you're going to perform is subtract 2 from the variable and print it out. Then a different test is to divide the variable by 2 and then print it out. And then the last one is double the variable and print it out. Okay? And then we'll get into more advanced stuff here. Use a float. Don't use an integer. It'll be easier for some of this stuff. I mean, I guess you can use an integer if you want, because like it'll really doesn't